In the vast and ancient lands of imperial China, where dynasties rose and fell like the shifting tides, marriage was far more than a union of two souls. It was a solemn pact between families, a sacred duty to ancestors, and a cornerstone of societal order. The customs surrounding these unions were steeped in tradition, often veiled in solemnity and ritual that could bewilder the uninitiated. Yet beneath the surface of elaborate ceremonies lay unsettling practices, especially for young brides caught in the web of expectations and control. In a remote village nestled among the rolling hills of the Han Dynasty, a young woman named Lianhua prepared for the most significant day of her life. At just 16, she was the embodiment of youthful hope and filial devotion, adorned in silk embroidered with delicate peonies, the symbol of prosperity and honor. Her family bustled around her, crafting the intricate paper decorations and setting out the lacquered trays of fruit and wine that would mark the celebration. To the village, this was a day of joy and promise, a testament to the harmonious order that marriage was meant to preserve. Yet Lianhua, despite the gentle smiles and festive chatter, carried a quiet apprehension. She had been told since childhood that her marriage was not hers to choose but a duty to her family's name and the will of ancestors long past. The matchmaker, an austere woman respected and feared in equal measure, had spoken of Lianhua's future husband with clinical detachment. To marry into the family of a prosperous landowner was a blessing, a means to elevate their standing and secure prosperity. But no one spoke of the rituals that awaited her behind closed doors, nor the price a bride might pay for fulfilling her role. The sun rose slowly over the fields, casting a golden hue on the village. Lianhua's mother helped her into the traditional red wedding gown, a color meant to ward off evil spirits and invite good fortune. The fabric felt heavy on her shoulders, as if the weight of centuries of expectation pressed down upon her. Her feet were bound tightly, a practice learned in secret from older women, meant to signify modesty and restraint but which brought a sharp sting with every movement. As the morning progressed, the distant sounds of drums and flutes filled the air, calling the village to witness the union that would bind two families and honor their ancestors. The importance of marriage during the Han Dynasty could not be overstated. It was a ritualized alliance that extended beyond the individual, entwining the fates of entire clans. The bride was not merely a partner but a vessel through which lineage and honor were preserved. In this society, a woman's value was measured by her obedience and ability to produce heirs, and marriage was the crucible where these qualities were tested and forged. Lianhua's youth and beauty made her a prized bride, yet these same attributes rendered her vulnerable to the strictures that awaited her. As the procession made its way to her future husband's home, villagers lined the streets, their faces a mixture of celebration and solemn respect. Lianhua's heart fluttered not with excitement but with a growing sense of unease. Behind the smiles and blessings lay an unspoken understanding. The rituals that would follow were as much about control as they were about union. The elders, guardians of tradition, watched with keen eyes, ensuring that every step conformed to the ancient customs passed down through generations. Inside the groom's household, the atmosphere was markedly different. The walls, adorned with ancestral tablets and incense burners, seemed to whisper of duty and sacrifice. Here, Lianhua would be expected to prove her worth not just as a wife but as a custodian of family honor. The ceremonies, elaborate and often harrowing, were designed to bind her to the family and to the rigid expectations that dictated her existence. What the outside world saw as celebration, the bride and her closest kin understood as a series of trials cloaked in tradition. In the quiet moments before the ceremony, Lianhua sat alone, her hands trembling as she traced the delicate embroidery on her sleeves. The stories she had heard from other village girls, whispered in hushed tones, spoke of rituals that tested a bride's endurance and obedience. These were not merely symbolic acts but harsh realities that could break the spirit if not met with unwavering compliance. Yet, to question or resist was unthinkable. The weight of ancestral expectation bore down like an unyielding storm. The matchmaker's voice cut through the silence, reminding Lianhua of her obligations and the honor she was about to bring to her family. The bride's role was clear: to embody virtue, to submit to the will of her husband and elders, and to uphold the sacred traditions that defined their culture. Any deviation was not merely personal failure but a stain on the family's reputation, carrying consequences that could ripple through generations. As the first chants of the wedding ceremony began, Lianhua rose, stepping forward with measured grace. The villagers' eyes were upon her, their hopes and judgments intertwined in the rituals unfolding. The bride's journey was only beginning, a path marked by ancient customs that celebrated union while demanding sacrifice. In the heart of this remote village, beneath the veneer of festivity, the true nature of marriage in imperial China was laid bare, a complex tapestry of duty, tradition, and unyielding control that would shape Lianhua's fate in ways she could scarcely imagine. As the wedding day unfolded beneath the watchful eyes of the village, what had begun as a celebration soon revealed its darker undercurrents. Lianhua's entrance into her husband's household was not the triumphant moment she had envisioned but the threshold to a series of hidden rites, secret ceremonies designed not for joy, but to test her obedience and purity. These rituals, cloaked in silence and known only to the eldest women and matchmakers, were a crucible through which every bride was forced to pass, binding her to the patriarchal order with unyielding rigor. The first of these rites was the crying marriage, a tradition shrouded in sorrow and endurance. Upon entering the bridal chamber, Lianhua was instructed to weep continuously for 3 days and nights, a display meant to demonstrate her willingness to sacrifice personal happiness for the good of the family. The tears were not born of grief alone but were carefully cultivated through ritualistic prompts, chants, symbolic mourning, and reminders of the burden she now carried. This public weeping was not simply an expression of emotion, it was a performance mandated by custom, a public proof of her submission to the life she was to lead. Lianhua's cheeks soon became raw, her eyes swollen and red from the relentless crying. Yet, despite the physical pain, the ritual served a deeper purpose. It was a psychological shackle, conditioning the bride to accept suffering as an intrinsic part of her role. To refuse or falter was to invite shame upon herself and her family, a stain that could tarnish their standing in the community. As she sat surrounded by silent onlookers, the weight of expectation pressed upon her like an invisible chain. But the crying marriage was only the beginning. Following this, Lianhua was compelled to partake in the symbolic consumption of bitter herbs. These concoctions, brewed from roots and leaves known for their acrid taste, were ingested to signify endurance and resilience. The bitterness was meant to cleanse the bride's spirit, purging any lingering attachments to her former life and forging her anew as a compliant wife. The taste was harsh and unforgiving, mirroring the path she was forced to tread. Alongside these rites came the physical constraints that defined a bride's preparation. Lianhua's feet, already bound tightly in the customary practice known as lotus binding, were further wrapped in layers of silk and cloth each day. This painful tradition, intended to mold small, delicate feet, was a cruel emblem of control, restricting movement and symbolizing the bride's submission. Each tightening brought sharp pangs, yet resistance was neither expected nor tolerated. The bound feet became both a mark of beauty and a prison, a daily reminder of the sacrifices demanded by tradition. Her garments, too, played a role in this ritualized subjugation. Heavy silks layered upon silks restricted her movements, while tightly fitted sleeves and corsets enforced a rigid posture. The clothing was designed not for comfort but for discipline, shaping the bride into an image of modesty and restraint. With every stitch, the fabric wove a narrative of control, binding Lianhua's body as surely as the rituals bound her spirit. These rites were far from mere superstition or harmless custom, they were deliberate mechanisms of patriarchal control, deeply embedded in the social fabric of imperial China. By enforcing physical pain, emotional display, and symbolic acts of submission, the community reinforced the notion that a woman's will was subordinate to the needs of her husband and family. The rituals served to suppress any flicker of autonomy, ensuring that the bride's identity was subsumed beneath layers of obedience and duty. Lianhua's experience was not unique but representative of countless young women whose lives were shaped by these hidden ceremonies. The village elders and matchmakers held unwavering faith in the necessity of these rites, believing that only through such trials could a bride prove her worth and secure the prosperity of her new family. To them, the suffering was a price paid for harmony and social order, a sacrament in the service of ancestral honor. Within the bridal chamber, the atmosphere was heavy with ritualistic gravity. The small, dimly lit room bore witness to Lianhua's endurance as the days passed. Her body ached from the binding and the constant wear of restrictive garments, while her spirit grappled with the relentless demands of the crying marriage. Each tear shed was a step deeper into submission, each bitter sip a renunciation of self. The silence among the women who watched was punctuated only by ritual chants and the occasional sharp command from the matron overseeing the rites. Beyond the physical and emotional trials, these secret customs also served a social function. They were a public yet intimate display of the bride's transformation, witnessed by family members who would carry the weight of her compliance or failure. The rituals reinforced the power dynamics within the household, establishing the bride's position as one who must endure and obey. The community's collective gaze was both a burden and a form of enforcement, ensuring conformity through the pressure of social surveillance. Despite the harshness of these rites, moments of quiet defiance flickered in Lianhua's heart, though they were carefully concealed beneath the veneer of obedience. She observed the subtle glances exchanged among other young wives, the whispered tales of endurance and shared suffering. These women, bound by tradition yet yearning for dignity, formed a silent sisterhood, their resilience hidden behind bowed heads and measured tears. Their stories, passed in hushed tones, spoke of small acts of resistance, secret prayers, hidden tokens, and the quiet assertion of self within the boundaries imposed upon them. Yet, for Lianhua, the path forward was a precarious balance between submission and survival. The rituals demanded not only her body and tears but the surrender of her will. Each ceremony was a step deeper into the role prescribed by centuries of custom, a role that required the erasure of personal desire in favor of familial duty. The bitter herbs, the crying, the binding, they were all threads in a tapestry designed to transform her into the ideal wife, obedient and enduring. As the final day of the secret rites approached, Lianhua's body bore the marks of her trials, swollen eyes, bruised feet, and a spirit tested beyond her years. Yet beneath the surface, a flicker of awareness grew, a recognition of the harsh realities concealed beneath the beauty of tradition. The rituals she endured were not merely customs but tools of control, shaping women into vessels of compliance. And within that recognition lay the first seeds of a quiet, unspoken questioning, a faint whisper of resistance yet to come. The day after the secret rites concluded, the household bristled with a new tension, one that extended beyond the walls of the bridal chamber into the wider community. Lianhua's ordeal was far from over. Now, the social theater of marriage demanded a public performance where her virtue and submission would be scrutinized under the unrelenting gaze of elders, neighbors, and kin. This was a moment where private suffering was converted into public spectacle, a test not only of the bride's endurance but of the family's honor and standing. Elders and matchmakers, the guardians of tradition, took their roles with solemn seriousness. They were the arbiters of custom, tasked with enforcing strict adherence to rituals that had been honed over centuries. To them, these customs were the bedrock of social order, a code that ensured harmony within families and, by extension, the empire itself. Their authority was absolute, their judgment swift and often merciless for those who faltered. They watched Lianhua's every move, ready to censure or praise, their eyes reflecting the weight of ancestral expectations. Lianhua's own family found themselves caught in a delicate balance between honoring the ancient customs and protecting their daughter's fragile well-being. Her mother, who had once helped bind her feet and encourage the tears, now harbored a quiet fear. The sacrifices demanded were steep, and the line between tradition and cruelty blurred in the flickering candlelight of the household. Yet, to challenge the customs openly was unthinkable. The family's reputation, their place within the village's intricate hierarchy, depended on Lianhua's compliance. The day culminated in the wedding feast, a gathering that brought together kin, neighbors, and village elders in a vivid display of community solidarity. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats and incense, the clatter of lacquered bowls punctuating whispered conversations. Yet beneath the festive veneer lurked an undercurrent of scrutiny, a collective anticipation for the moment when Lianhua would be tested publicly. The test itself was as unsettling as it was ritualized. Lianhua was called to the center of the room, the red silk of her gown shimmering under the lantern light. Here, she was subjected to a series of examinations designed to assess her modesty and submissiveness, qualities deemed essential for a proper wife. The elders posed questions veiled as casual inquiries but loaded with significance, probing her knowledge of appropriate behavior and her willingness to defer to her husband's authority. One particularly harrowing moment came when a respected elder asked Lianhua to demonstrate her humility by lowering her gaze and responding only with measured, soft-spoken words. The bride's heart pounded as she complied, aware that any misstep could ignite whispers of impropriety or disrespect. The guests watched intently, their expressions a mixture of approval and judgment. This public scrutiny was not merely about etiquette but served as a proxy for assessing the bride's capacity to uphold the family's honor through obedience. The feast continued with toasts and blessings, but the undercurrent of evaluation persisted. Conversations often circled back to the bride's performance, with some guests expressing admiration for her composure, while others whispered doubts about the harshness of the rituals she had endured. These murmurs revealed a fissure within the community, a tension between reverence for tradition and an emerging discomfort with its severity. Lian Hua's position was precarious. Success meant not only personal acceptance but the elevation of her family's status, a reward for enduring the trials imposed upon her. Failure, however, carried consequences far graver than embarrassment. A bride perceived as lacking in virtue or submission could bring shame, triggering gossip that might isolate the family socially and diminish their prospects in future alliances. The pressure was immense, a silent force shaping every gesture and word. In the days following the feast, the social fabric of the village continued to reflect the weight of these expectations. Matchmakers and elders convened in private, discussing the nuances of Lian Hua's comportment and speculating on the implications for the family's reputation. Their conversations revealed the intricate web of social standing, where honor was both currency and burden, and where the success of a single marriage could ripple through generations. Within Lian Hua's household, the atmosphere was a mixture of cautious relief and lingering tension. Her husband, a man of quiet demeanor and rigid adherence to custom, observed her with a detached appraisal, measuring her suitability as a wife and future mother. The expectations placed upon her extended beyond mere obedience. She was to become the linchpin in a lineage, the bearer of heirs who would carry forward the family name and legacy. Yet beneath the surface of this orchestrated compliance, cracks began to appear. Lian Hua's mother, once a staunch enforcer of tradition, found herself wrestling with conflicting emotions. The toll these customs exacted on her daughter's health and spirit stirred a quiet unease. She began to wonder whether the community's reverence for ritual masked a cruelty too great to bear. But such thoughts remained confined to whispered conversations behind closed doors, for the price of dissent was high. The broader community, too, was not monolithic in its acceptance of these practices. Some younger women, having observed the ordeal of brides like Lian Hua, began to question the fairness and necessity of such harsh customs. They shared stories in secret, forming a fragile network of solidarity that challenged the inevitability of obedience. These whispered alliances, though tentative and fraught with risk, signaled the first stirrings of resistance within the confines of a rigid social order. Despite the pressures, Lian Hua herself navigated this complex terrain with a quiet determination. Each public test, each scrutinizing gaze, was met with measured grace, yet her mind wrestled with the constraints imposed upon her. The rituals that demanded her compliance also awakened a subtle awareness of the cost exacted by tradition. The wedding feast, the elders' questions, the whispered judgments, all were threads in a tapestry she was expected to wear without complaint. In this crucible of social expectation, Lian Hua's identity began to shift. No longer merely a girl from a remote village, she was now a symbol of her family's honor and the embodiment of cultural values that prized obedience above all. The rituals that bound her physically and emotionally also shaped the contours of her emerging self, a self forged in the tension between duty and desire, tradition and individuality. As the community settled into the rhythms of daily life, the legacy of the wedding feast lingered like a shadow. It was a reminder that marriage in imperial China was a complex interplay of joy and suffering, public celebration and private sacrifice. For Lian Hua and countless others, the path ahead was one paved with expectations as ancient as the ancestors whose spirits watched silently from their tablets. In this delicate balance of power and submission, the true cost of tradition was beginning to reveal itself. As the days lengthened into weeks, the weight of tradition pressed ever more heavily upon Lian Hua's shoulders. The initial ceremonies and public tests had passed, but the true toll of her new life was only beginning to reveal itself, in the quiet moments behind closed doors, in the weariness etched onto her face, and in the faltering strength of her spirit. The rituals that once seemed distant customs now bore down with relentless force, unraveling her youthful resilience and exposing the profound psychological cost of submission. The household, once filled with the clamor of celebration, now echoed with an oppressive stillness. Lian Hua moved through her days wrapped in the heavy silks of duty, her bound feet aching with every step, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion. The physical pain was constant, but it was the invisible wounds, the erosion of hope, the stifling of voice, that cut deepest. Each demand for obedience, each enforced silence, chipped away at the core of who she had been. Yet, within this atmosphere of repression, quiet flickers of resistance began to emerge, not in grand gestures, but in whispered conversations and furtive glances exchanged among the women of the household. These women, themselves bound by the same customs and expectations, shared stories of endurance and subtle defiance. They spoke softly of secret alliances formed in the shadows, of small acts that preserved dignity in a world designed to suppress it. One such woman was Mai, an older wife who had long navigated the treacherous waters of marriage with a blend of pragmatism and quiet rebellion. She became a confidant to Lianhua, offering counsel veiled in metaphor and compassion. Mai spoke of the importance of preserving one's spirit, even when the body was constrained, and of finding strength in shared suffering. Through her, Lianhua learned that resistance need not be loud or confrontational, it could be a delicate dance of compliance and assertion, a secret language understood only by those who suffered alike. Within these whispered exchanges, Lianhua found solace and a flicker of hope. The knowledge that she was not alone in her pain, that others bore similar burdens and yet found ways to endure, kindled a quiet determination. It was a fragile flame, easily extinguished by the harsh realities outside their private circle, but it was enough to sustain her through the darkest hours. The psychological toll of these rituals was evident in the subtle changes that began to mark Lianhua's demeanor. Once bright-eyed and eager, she now carried a measured caution in her gaze, a guardedness born of necessity. Moments of joy were fleeting, overshadowed by the ever-present awareness of expectation and surveillance. Sleep was often elusive, haunted by dreams where she was bound not by cloth but by invisible chains of obligation and silence. Despite this, there were moments when the rigidity of her existence softened. In the quiet early mornings, before the household stirred, Lianhua would steal brief moments to herself, small acts of rebellion that reaffirmed her identity. She would trace patterns in the dust on the wooden floor, hum a forgotten folk song, or press a hand to her chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart still hers alone. These acts, though minor, were profound assertions of self in a world determined to erase individuality. Yet, the tension between submission and resistance remained a delicate balance. The rituals and customs that governed her life were deeply entrenched, woven into the very fabric of society and identity. To fully reject them was unthinkable, to fully embrace them was to risk losing oneself entirely. This liminal space, between compliance and defiance, defined Lianhua's existence, a daily negotiation between survival and selfhood. The broader societal implications of these rituals became clearer as Lianhua observed the world beyond her immediate confines. She saw how marriage customs reinforced patriarchal control not only within individual households but across the community. They served as mechanisms to suppress female autonomy, ensuring that women remained bound to roles that prioritized duty over desire, obedience over freedom. The rituals were less about honoring women and more about enforcing a social order that privileged male authority. Within this context, Lianhua's quiet questioning was both radical and dangerous. To question the rituals was to challenge the foundations of a society that had endured for centuries. Yet, beneath the surface of unquestioning acceptance, there were cracks, whispers of discontent, subtle acts of rebellion, and an undercurrent of change carried by those who dared to imagine a different future. Lianhua's internal struggle mirrored this broader tension. Each day was a test of endurance, a challenge to retain her sense of self amid forces determined to mold her into a symbol of submission. The psychological battles were invisible to most but as fierce as any physical trial. Her spirit wrestled with despair and hope, conformity and resistance, tradition and the yearning for freedom. As she navigated these turbulent waters, Lianhua began to envision a future beyond the constraints imposed upon her. Not a future defined by the narrow roles prescribed by custom, but one where women might reclaim their voices and agency. This vision was faint and fragile, a secret seed planted in the fertile soil of suffering and resilience. It offered a glimmer of possibility, a promise that the cycle of control might one day be broken. In the quiet confines of her chamber, surrounded by the symbols of duty and sacrifice, Lianhua made a silent vow. She would endure the rituals imposed upon her, but she would also carry within her the hope for change, a hope that might one day blossom into a new narrative for women like herself. This quiet resolve was her shield against despair, a testament to the resilience that tradition sought to suppress. Thus, the story of Lianhua's marriage unfolded not only as a tale of submission and control but as a complex portrait of endurance and subtle resistance. It revealed the profound psychological toll exacted by rituals that demanded obedience at the cost of self, while also illuminating the flickers of defiance that persisted even in the darkest moments. Through her experience, the broader struggle between cultural preservation and individual suffering came into sharp focus, highlighting the delicate balance that defined the lives of countless women in Imperial China. The final ritual had been completed, the tears shed, the bitter herbs swallowed, the feet bound and tested, the public trials endured. Lianhua stood at the threshold of her new life, a life forged in sacrifice and submission, yet beneath the surface of compliance, a quiet revolution was stirring. Though she had fulfilled the exacting demands of tradition, she carried within her a resolve as silent as it was profound, a vow to alter the narrative for the women who would come after her. In the dim light of her chamber, Lianhua traced the intricate patterns embroidered on her gown, each stitch a testament to the generations of women who had walked this path before her. Their stories were woven into the fabric of custom, yet their voices had been muted by time and expectation. She understood now that the rituals she had endured were not merely personal trials but emblematic of a broader system designed to control and suppress. And so, she resolved to honor those legacies not through blind obedience, but through a commitment to change. The story of Lianhua's marriage was both ancient and immediate, a reflection of customs deeply embedded in the Han dynasty yet resonant across centuries. The rituals, while rooted in history, revealed enduring themes of control, sacrifice, and resilience that transcended time. By completing the rites, she had become part of this continuum, but her quiet vow signaled a fracture in the seemingly unbreakable chain. In the years that followed, subtle shifts began to ripple through the social fabric. The harshness of the crying marriage softened in some regions, replaced by less brutal displays of filial piety. The binding of feet, once an unequivocal symbol of beauty and submission, faced growing criticism and gradual abandonment. These changes were slow and uneven, met with resistance from traditionalists but embraced by those who recognized the human cost of such customs. Lianhua's own life became a testament to this gradual transformation. Though constrained by the expectations of her time, she sought ways to nurture the seeds of change within her household. She encouraged the younger women to speak their minds in hushed confidences, to question the inevitability of suffering, and to envision lives beyond the confines of rigid tradition. Her influence was subtle but persistent, a quiet force challenging the established order from within. Her family, initially bound by honor and obedience, began to recognize the value in her cautious defiance. Elders who had once enforced the strictest adherence to custom found themselves confronted with the undeniable toll these rituals exacted. In some moments of rare candor, they acknowledged the need for compassion and adaptation, even as they clung to the pillars of ancestral reverence. Beyond her immediate circle, Lianhua's story echoed in the whispered tales passed among villages and towns. Women shared accounts of the bride who had endured and yet vowed to change the future, a beacon of resilience that inspired others to question and resist. These stories were fragile threads of hope woven into the tapestry of a culture grappling with its own evolution. Yet, the legacy of these marriage customs remained complex. Tradition, deeply entwined with identity and social cohesion, did not simply vanish. The rituals that had once seemed immutable revealed themselves to be living practices, capable of transformation but also resistant to change. The cost of tradition, as Lianhua had come to understand, was not only measured in suffering but also in the courage required to challenge it. Her vow underscored a timeless truth that the preservation of culture must never come at the expense of humanity. The rituals that once demanded unquestioning obedience were being re-examined through the lens of compassion and selfhood. Lianhua's journey illuminated this delicate balance, revealing that the strength to endure need not preclude the strength to hope and to change. In the quiet moments of reflection, as she contemplated the path she had walked, Lianhua understood that her story was but one chapter in a larger narrative, one that encompassed the sacrifices of countless women and the slow march toward greater autonomy. Her silent promise to future generations was a beacon, a testament to the enduring human spirit that persists even under the harshest of traditions. Thus, the story closed not with an end but with a beginning, an invitation to question, to endure, and ultimately to transform. It was a reminder that history is not a fixed script but a living dialogue between past and future, between duty and desire, between the costs of tradition and the imperative of change. In Lian Hua's quiet resolve lay the hope that one day, the rituals designed to bind would instead become rites of honor, celebrations not of sacrifice alone, but of resilience, dignity, and the unyielding pursuit of freedom.